That was a Heart and Hand production.
Hello and welcome back to the Scout Report. I am your host, Adam Thornton, and today I am delighted to be joined by Aurel. Aurel, thank you for coming on. First of all, it's really great. It's really a pleasure to have you on the show. Do you want to give the listeners a little bit of background about sort of who you are and your role in football?
Yeah, thanks, Adam. So I'm Aurel. I work at 21st Group as a senior data scientist. So we're a sports intelligence company that provides predictive insights and analytics to different stakeholders in the game to kind of help them stay ahead of the game, not only in football, but also other sports as well. So my background, I've been with the company for 4 years now. I had a few years working in different industries, and then I had an economics degree. That's my kind of background. I think before starting in football and kind of beginning to understand that I want to kind of play a role in that field, I started my own blog about 4 or 5 years ago now called Finding Space, and that was kind of my start to kind of provide my own opinion and insights into football. I think looking back at some of those blogs now, they're probably not the best, but that was my kind of showcase to kind of see what perspective I can provide on football and analytics. And then soon after that I joined 21st Group, and as I say, I've kind of been there ever since.
So 21st Group is probably not a company that many of our listeners will know about hugely. I don't think there's much involvement, certainly in terms of Scottish football, that we've seen so far. Could you just give a bit of an insight into not necessarily your day-to-day role, but just the type of things that might happen, I guess, if we focus on football, but if there's anything interesting from maybe other sports, that would be quite useful. Just the type of conversations you have, or the type of services that you're offering to people.
Yeah, of course. So as I say, we're a sports intelligence agency that provides predictive insights. We have, I guess, 4 key areas of services that we kind of deliver on. The first is performance intelligence. So that's around supporting athletes, teams, agencies to identify value talent, but also improving the performance. So we might work with a club to kind of help them on their recruitment strategy or understand their players' performance better. Then we have a second pillar called competition intelligence. So this is around delivering insights and evidence-based strategies to different stakeholders to optimize schedules. So for instance, if a competition isn't that engaging for fans, what can we do to the structure that might improve it, and trying to provide insights as to what that might do to kind of make sure that a league's more competitive, let's say for the title or relegation. The third is investment intelligence. So there's obviously been a huge amount of investment across different clubs, especially in the UK in the last few years. So we help investors across sports to kind of identify a club, helping them do due diligence, post-transaction, during transaction, and also just before a transaction takes place as well. And then our final kind of specialism is around fan connection. So this is around providing or supporting media, brands, gaming, betting companies around providing insights that makes sport more engaging to watch. So kind of enhancing a fan's experience as they're watching a sport. They're the kind of 4 areas that we specialize in.
So I guess for what we would be interested in would be maybe that first pillar, if you like. What type of things in there when we're talking about player intelligence, etc.? What type of metrics would we be looking at, or what type of outputs would we be keen to see there?
Yeah, so we've got our own kind of bespoke models that we've built and used and kind of use with our clients. So for instance, we have what we call our World Super League. So this is an algorithm that we have that basically ranks teams globally. So it ranks any team in the world, and it can give you a sense of how good are, for instance, Rangers relative to a team in the Spanish second division, or a team in Saudi Arabia, or wherever they may be. So this is our kind of World Super League that ranks teams globally. And we use this model to simulate our league projections, so different leagues, different tournament structures. But it's also a really important model to kind of understand player performance. The way we approach player performance and what we call our player contribution model, it works using a top-down system. So what I mean by that is we first try to gauge, okay, how good is a specific team? Let's say they are average Premier League side. And then we kind of go on to say, okay, this player is playing for a team that are this good. How often are they playing for them? If a player is playing for a good team very often, the chances are that they're probably really good. So we kind of take into account their minutes played, their goals, assists, clean sheets. So quite basic level data, but it ensures that we have very wide coverage. So we rank over 40,000 players globally. So it gives us very wide coverage. And then using that model, we can help clubs to identify, okay, you're looking at a pool of, I don't know, 1,000 players. We're a club that's at this level. So let's say Rangers, taking them as an example, give us an idea of those 1,000 players, how many of them are playing at an appropriate level that would be able to contribute to the Rangers first team. So we might say, look, there's a few players in the Scandinavian league, there's a few players in these other European leagues and South America that we think could contribute to your team. And again, it uses that system of understanding the quality of teams globally and then that player rating system below. So that's kind of one example of models that we use to kind of support clubs in recruitment decisions.
Because I guess that's a different thing, isn't it? We've all used and seen the radars, etc. on Twitter, but what I think maybe the casual observer probably doesn't really realise there is that if, for example, you've got, I don't know, someone playing in the MLS, for example, and putting up really good numbers there, when you then compare them to someone playing at the top end of the Premier League, you're not really comparing apples and apples there. If you score 30 goals in the MLS and someone has scored 9 goals in the Premier League, that doesn't necessarily make you a better goal scorer. So I suppose there's lots of underlying weighting and metrics and things that you have to apply there to make sure that it's as logical as possible.
Yeah, exactly. So, the way I suppose I glossed it over a bit slightly, but we understand how different teams play against how good their quality is relative to different sides, as we try to see how their continental performance is. So how good are Scottish teams playing in the Champions League? And then we can therefore connect teams. So we can say if they're beating teams in this league quite regularly, therefore the quality gap between these leagues. And as we get more and more data, more results, we can gauge that quality. But yeah, around the point on radars, I think it's really interesting. I think we have an example where there's 2 radars that we have on 2 different players. One of them, the player's radars essentially full, is kind of like they're the best in their position across all stats. And then there's another radar, which is, I think it might be of Declan Rice or something, but it's less full. It's less full, but he stands out on his certain positions, certain statistics. Sorry, but it's interesting to say, if you don't add any other context to that, initially you would say, okay, the player that has the radar more full is actually better. But I think what our models try to help is say that, okay, that player actually, when we disclose the name, he's a player playing in an Asian league, so it's a very low quality league. So if you don't have context in terms of understanding the strengths of different leagues, it's as you say, no good saying that this player's scoring X amount of goals and so on. So you can't get that understanding of how that might translate to your league. And we have a kind of exchange rate, is what we like to call it. But essentially we can say, okay, how much are 10 goals in the Scottish Premier League equivalent to, let's say, the Championship or the Premier League? So we might say 10 Scottish goals are worth perhaps 6 in the Premier League and maybe 7 in the Championship. So those types of translations help us to kind of convert those goals and those metrics to kind of a more realistic estimate of what a player is likely to do in a given league that you're playing in.
So do you use that? I guess you use that for players specifically, but you mentioned, does that also get used for teams and leagues as well? So does that flip back up the way to combine all those metrics together for all the players into a one metric for Rangers to be compared against any other team?
Exactly, yeah. So we'll have an overall rating, an attack and a defense rating for each team, and then an overall rating based on that. So we might say Borussia Dortmund are a good example. They're probably a 20th best team in the world, but their attack's really good, but their defense isn't so good. So we can use those to kind of estimate the probability that they win or lose a specific game. But as I kind of mentioned before, these models are mainly used as a kind of, I suppose, a filtering system. So you might go from 1,000 players to kind of here's an appropriate 100. But then on top of that, you would then go on to use, I suppose, event level data or tracking data. So I guess the way we try to think about it is there's different tiers of data. Let's say level 1 is results and minutes played. Level 2 is perhaps more like F9 data, so it's like shots, tackles, interceptions, and then level 3 is event data. So players in this position, XY coordinate, doing this event, and then I guess level 4 is tracking. So those models I described, they're on that first tier, and then you would use what we would use other models, be it in level 2, level 3, to kind of provide more insights around a player's stylistic elements and how they're likely to fit into your team.
Cool. And in terms of football clubs using data and analytics, I think it's obviously gotten a lot better, maybe in the last 5-10 years, in terms of how clubs use that. How in your experience then, I guess, I think there's always a lot of conversation around, particularly on Twitter, where people are putting out a lot of data, and all you hear is people within football clubs don't need this level of data. They don't care about this to the nth degree. They want sort of high level things. How do you, I guess, not necessarily get clubs to buy in, but how do you go about maybe presenting that in a way that maybe can be useful to all levels?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's probably, often you might have really good insights, but if you're not able to deliver them or communicate them in a way that's easy to understand, I think that's the key thing. That's the key challenge with data science in general, or data and analytics. So I guess, making sure that the final output of whatever you're kind of building is simplified. So for instance, we have a lot of possession value models now that have a lot of very sophisticated simulations and calculations going on in the background, but the final message in those types of models is that if a player does this event on the pitch, it increases your chances or decreases your chances of scoring. So that's a very simple thing to understand, that, if we then aggregate that data and say, this is the player that's had the most actions, that's actually improved their team's chance to winning, it doesn't matter. I suppose it does matter, but it's kind of delivering that message in a simplified manner that someone's able to make a decision on the back of. I guess us at 21st Group, with the way we try to think about data, is data can be very descriptive, but what we try to provide is predictive analytics. So you might see a player, making tackles, interceptions, and so on, but what does that actually do in terms of impacting your team's chance of scoring, impact of winning a game? What does that actually do to the kind of the thing that you're trying to benchmark yourself against? And that's where I guess we kind of position ourselves as decision makers in the sport.
Yeah, I guess that context you mentioned is always key, isn't it? We've all seen I guess those big Twitter accounts that after a game they'll list this player 500 passes, for example, 100 passes, say, and 97% success rate and 10 interceptions and this and that. And you can people will objectively say it looks like that player's had a good game, but it's that sort of impact of, did that pass actually lead to a goal? Did it lead to this? Did it lead to that? It's that context that I think you guys are going to be crucial at providing.
Exactly. I think we always have what we call the so what. So if any time we provide an insight on something, it's the so what does that actually mean? And that's the kind of key question we try to ask ourselves to ensure that, when we are running these simulations and models and we're providing these insights, they actually have a meaningful impact. And it's not just descriptive. So that's something that we kind of, as I say, base a lot of our kind of, we constantly ask ourselves the so what, why is that important? How is it important? And what does it mean? And once you can provide answers to those types of questions, I think we can begin to feel a lot more confident in kind of making sure that these insights are kind of going to be useful to make a decision that's likely to improve your performance of a player or a team.
Yeah, definitely. So obviously you mentioned you've been involved with 21st Group for 4 years now. This space is obviously growing exponentially, I think, every year. What's the big changes that I guess that you've seen in that period of time? I myself have been probably involved in the podcasting and using Y-Scout, etc., for about 5 or 6 years, and even since then it's grown hugely. So what have you found from being involved in a much more professional and deeper level? What's the big advances that you've seen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose more broadly, I've seen a bigger acceptance of probably data in that period of time. As more and more clubs begin to use data, other clubs that aren't using it begin to feel that there's perhaps some value in there that they're missing out. And not only that, there's good case studies. I suppose there's Brighton and Brentford you can look at, but there's also other clubs such as FC Nordsjælland that, despite having smaller budgets, they've been able to overperform, and their underlying strategies often using data to find an edge in the market. So I think in the 4 years that I've been working at 21st Group, I've definitely seen more of an I suppose open-mindedness from clubs to kind of be open to data and often kind of make it an integral part of their recruitment strategy. So I think that's one area. It's just the growth of data in the game and across different sports as well. I also think there's been a lot of, I suppose, developments in terms of possession value models. So XG being the big one, not being a possession value, but it was a big kind of, I suppose, moment in terms of that becoming more mainstream. But I think, yeah, we've seen big developments in terms of understanding on-pitch performance and valuing every action that happens in a game. I think that's massively important. But I also think with that, what often gets forgotten is that it's often only for a set number of leagues, and you don't have that coverage to understand those or answer those same types of questions in weaker leagues. So I guess that's an area that we'll probably see more growth of, is kind of data, but across a wider range of leagues.
Do you think, has there been a lot of obviously just now it's a very busy time for various companies in this space, I would guess, with the transfer window, etc. Do you get involved in that much? I know you mentioned there's be some learnings, etc., that you can give to clubs, etc. What about maybe individual players or agents? We know that a lot of players are taking a lot more interest in maybe data and analysis and things than they used to. Do you get any individuals coming to you to say, can you, I don't know, for example, can you find me a club that you think would be really well suited to my skill set or my levels and things? Is that something that happens yet, or is that maybe more at a sort of club level looking for players rather than the other way around?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, I mean, yeah, we support clubs on both of those points that you mentioned. So firstly, around identifying players in different markets. So that's one area that we support them. But as you say, we're increasingly being involved as well in around finding suitable clubs for players. So either representing an agency or a specific agent to say, you know, I've got X player, and then we kind of go look at the data, understand their profile, understand their level, and kind of have a bespoke model that can identify, okay, these are suitable clubs that have a need for you. Let's say based on your playing style, you're more likely to be successful there than other clubs, but also they're at an appropriate level. So we might be able to, one thing that we often do is, for instance, estimate a player's usage at a club. So, you know, if you're Madison and your options are two different clubs, what's the, for instance, the probability that you might play 80% of minutes at one club compared to another club that might be at a high level, but maybe you only get 50% of minutes and so on. So that's another area that we help as well, around identifying suitable clubs for players. And again, I think that's something that's growing in the game. And I think we began to see players also using data for kind of contract renewals, as you know. So I think they're becoming much more aware around the kind of, the different use cases of data to kind of take their career forward.
Yeah, it's interesting that, isn't it? Because you never really think about that from a sort of logical point of view, because a player and a manager can have that conversation, and it's almost like a sales pitch. The manager really wants to sign the player, and they say, "Yeah, I'll definitely play in every game." But I don't imagine it's written into many contracts that you will play every single game. So I guess the players having that information, and the agents who are trying to make sure they get the best deals, having that information to say, look, I could go to two clubs that are maybe quite well ranked, but given all of these factors, given the players that are also there, given how this team plays, I'm more likely to get more game time and maybe get more future success at club B rather than club A. Just having all that information is really interesting for players.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it can also be used in the position of a selling club. You know, if you've got two options of selling a player, perhaps one of them, the fee is lower right now, but you might have a sell-on clause. If you say, okay, club B is paying me less, but they've got a higher sell-on clause in the future, and we estimate that player is projected to kind of grow in value by, let's say, 30%, perhaps there's actually a chance that you might end up making more money in that, or generating more revenue using that method, because you're accounting for the fact of how they're likely to improve in the future. So it's just about asking yourselves those types of questions and being objective in your decision making.
Yeah, that's an interesting one for Rangers, I guess, because we sold Calvin Bassey last summer. We made a huge profit. I think it was £250,000. We got him cross border
Mm.
from Leicester, and he went for I think it was €23 million plus a sell on. But obviously, there's been rumours this summer but I'm moving to maybe Brighton or Fulham for less money than
Yeah.
that. Where our sell on was 10% of profit. But I guess metrics such as the ones that yourself offer maybe could look at it and say that's his max value. Maybe he wouldn't get maybe he wouldn't have as much success as Ajax if he went to maybe somewhere else, and you could then get benefit that way. So it's almost that longer term strategic thinking rather than just can we get the best money for the player right now.
Exactly, and it's also, I suppose, putting the way I like to think about it, or we do in perhaps in data science, is putting probabilities or thinking about how confident are you of something happening, and thinking about it in that way. But as you say, the Calvin Bassey one's a really interesting example.
What about the other sports then? I guess just to wrap up, you mentioned you're involved in a few other ones. I'm not sure exactly which you cover, but just to give a bit of a flavour there, what type of things do you offer in maybe one or two other sports that people might be interested in?
Yeah, so we do a lot of work in, as I say, other sports, golf being another one that we kind of support on. So working with players or rights holders in the game. Last year, we were working on the strike meter, which was a metric that we'd developed around estimating how good a shot is when you hit when a golfer hits a shot between 0 and 100, and it takes into account different data in terms of how hard or what position you're striking a ball and so on. So we do a lot of work in golf, but we've also expanded into cricket now as well, and other sports as well. So yeah, we're not just football, but I guess the start of the business was mainly football and golf, so that's where we've kind of evolved from.
It's funny as soon as you started speaking about cricket and sorry, golf and how hard the ball, number of yards and all that sort of stuff, it sort of makes
Yeah,
sense. But people still do struggle with football in that sense, don't they? In terms of what you're basically saying there is I guess similar to like an XG model. What's the best thing to
yeah.
do in this situation? But people do still struggle with that, I guess, because football has maybe not had that. It's maybe been a relatively late adopter, certainly in terms of golf or even American football or baseball and things in terms of using those metrics. You do still take a bit of time to sort of fit your brain around it, but it's essentially the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely spot on. I think that's you kind of hit the nail on the head there in terms of at the beginning, even with XG, I think there was a lot of kind of I suppose not understanding something very well is often what leads to not for it not to be used in the correct way. But now obviously XG is understood better and it's used across the industry to kind of understand underlying performance. But yeah, no, it's the same thing. There's often always a bit of traction when something new is developed, because although it's trying to help fans understand, I suppose, the sport that they love even more, if it's not really simple to understand, then there can
Yeah.
obviously be a bit of traction. But yeah, no, I think it's any ways that we can kind of understand sport better, but also enhance our experience as fans in that context, I think should kind of be explored.
Yeah. So given, last question then, given it's
Yeah.
21st as a sports intelligence and predictive intelligence agency, I have to ask you what you think is going to be the next I guess the next big thing in football from a data point of view.
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think there's three things that come on the top of my head on this one. So I think the first one is, I think there'll be maybe in the next, I don't know, 3-5 years, but more around off the ball analysis. Now with tracking data and event data, we've got a lot of stuff on the ball, but we're beginning to kind of get into the realms of off the ball data. So I think I saw an interview that Ian Graham did around Liverpool analyzing skeletal data. So there's about
Okay.
29 coordinates on a player. So you can see a player's positioning at any given point in the game. But
Wow.
what I also found really interesting is they also have coordinates on a player's eyes. So you can actually see when a player
When they're
is
scanning.
scanning.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see, okay, this central midfielder makes great passes, but actually the reason they do that is because they scan, let's say, 20% more than other players. So I think off the ball data is going to be a really interesting one that we might begin to see more of. And then linked to that as well, I think cognitive data. I've seen a few academies in Scandinavia beginning to use cognitive data more in their decision making, even with young players, to kind of understand, okay, certain types of, I suppose, cognitive profiles, there's more of a chance that that player will be successful in the future. So I think
Mhm.
that could be quite interesting as well. And then the third one, I guess it's a bit more boring, but I think it'd be great to see more of a kind of standardization of data generally in sports. I think a big challenge that a lot of people often have is working with different data sets. Data often is very messy, and there's a lot of pre-processing that's required to get it in a shape and form that you can use it properly. So I think it'd be interesting to see if in the future there's more of a standardization of data. So then if everyone's using the same data, I think it will help kind of foster more of a data-driven approach across the sport at different levels as well. So I think they're my three. So we'll see in 3 to 5 years how wrong I probably am. But yeah, that's mine.
Yeah, I think the last one is probably quite key, because I know it's hard enough sometimes to sell things like XG to people, particularly on Twitter, when then someone goes and pulls up a different XG rating for the same shot
exactly.
from somewhere else, and they just completely lose faith. They just think you're just making this up as you go along. But I think that standardization would be key. Aurel, thank you very much for joining me. Before you go, can you tell the listeners and the viewers where they can hear more from yourself and 21st Group?
Yeah, so feel free to kind of follow me on Twitter. It's Aurel NZ. I kind of post quite a lot on there around just interesting insights during the season and projections. And then also, please feel free to kind of, as I say, follow 21st Group on Twitter. And we've also got our website where we've recently launched our quality rankings, which rank different sports athletes across different sports, but also competitions. And there's things on there such as the most efficient clubs as well. So I guess Rangers are probably not far off on that as well. So yeah, feel free to kind of connect with us on any of those platforms. But yeah, it's been a pleasure being on the podcast. Thanks a lot. Yeah,
and it's the Open weekend as well. I've seen that you've predicted that Scottish Scheffler should win the Open. So we'll all be watching with bated breath to see if that happens. Aurel, thank you very much for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you.
This is a Heart and Hand production.